Good morning, Harlan. It's great to be with you today. We're continuing our series called Lessons from Our Old Normal in Our New Normal. And last week, Pastor Aaron talked about courage in our new normal. The week before that, we talked about motivation in our new normal. Maybe if you were like me a little bit, you felt a little bit of demotivating emotions during this shutdown and pandemic. The week before that, we talked a little bit about how old pandemics or old problems don't make pandemics go away. And today we're kind of continuing this series. And the premise of this series is really simple, that whether we like it or not, a new normal is coming, but surely there are some things that we are learning about our old normal and even during this pandemic that we want to keep with us. We don't want to go back to everything the way that it was. There are some lessons worth taking forward. And today, I think especially in light of a potential second shutdown or partial shutdown or kind of numbers being diminished again for how many people can gather, I think today's lesson is going to be incredibly important. And it's just this: a healthy perspective in it will help you thrive through it. A healthy perspective in it will help you thrive through it. Now, your perspective, which is really just a particular attitude or a point of view, it will help determine whether or not you thrive through something or simply survive through it. So for example, we're in the middle of a shutdown. Sure, we can do some things, but the numbers of what we can do and how many can gather are limited. But what most people didn't realize, me included by the way, was that a physical shutdown would inevitably lead to a emotional shutdown in varying degrees. And when we all realized that, you saw the shift in terminology. It went from social distancing to physical distancing, because truth is, you need to be socially connected and integrated to a larger community, whether that's a work community, whether that's a community of a group of friends or family or whatnot, whatever that looks like. But you need to be integrated and connected, because a healthy community can help you maintain a healthy perspective through crisis. But here is really the quintessential problem that everyone struggles with, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's some other challenge. How do you see past it when you're in it? Now, eventually, this will end. We'll be in our church building. The pandemic will end, whether it's next year or the year after or many years from now. Who knows? But the question really is, well, how do you thrive through it? And I don't know if you've noticed, but other than American politics, the coronavirus really dominates our news cycle. And, it's very important and we need to stay informed and whatnot. But the truth is, our lives are filled with other challenges that have nothing to do with the coronavirus. And so most people really at some point in their lives, maybe even now, are in something and they can't see past it. And if you're not diligent, an unhealthy perspective in it, whatever it is for you, can become the barrier to the opportunities in your life. It can become the barrier to the blessings that God has for you in your life. Your perspective, your attitude can make a greater impact than your giftings, can make a greater impact even than your financial investment in a context, a situation, or even a person. For example, as a father, I want to give our children the very best. I want to give them great stuff and great toys. Well, although not too many toys, because we've realized we have too many. But there is a greater gift that I can give them than a financial or a material investment. And that's my attitude. I want to model that a healthy perspective in discomfort can actually help you thrive through discomfort. Now, I get it. That is easier said than done. In fact, just surviving is easier than thriving. And I honestly wonder how many people are just surviving right now. It's no secret that this has been an incredibly challenging season for everyone. Some of you have been very lonely because you haven't been able to have the same connections that you normally do. Some of us have had to take a reduced salary. Some of us have even lost their jobs. And before I say anything else, if that's you, if you are struggling with kind of life's material needs, I want you to know, one, that we're here to help. The truth is, we can't do everything, but we can do something, and we don't want you to feel like you're abandoned during this time. But there is something else that you also need to do. You have to believe that you'll get through, because you were not created just to survive through it. You were created to thrive through it, whatever it is right now. And a healthy perspective will keep you encouraged while you're actually in it. Now, in this passage that we're about to read, the Apostle Paul was in something. He was in a city called Ephesus, and in this city there was incredible hardship. It started as incredible opportunity, but then it shifted. There were even riots at one point. Apparently, so many people became Christians that the blacksmiths who made idols to Greek gods for a living were losing business, and so they incited riots. So in addition to the riots, in addition to the persecution, it must have felt like that the doors of opportunity were closing for the Apostle Paul. He was in something that really wasn't all that great. It started great, but it wasn't great. And in that context, he wrote a second letter to the Corinthian church. And in that letter, this is what he said. And I think it's something that it speaks to us today. He said, starting in chapter 4, verse 16, "That is why we never give up." I could preach hours on just those three words, never give up. We're actually building our basement right now because we need the room for our kids. We're homeschooling them, and we just need a space for them to kind of run around a little bit more. But the thing about starting a project is that it's really easy to start, but a lot harder to follow through on. But here's our challenge. Because we've already started, we can't do anything else in our basement. We have power tools down there. We have sawdust down there. In fact, it's hard to even do laundry because when you move your clothes from your washer to your dryer, if you drop anything, it gets sawdust over it and it gets dirty. And so, but the thing is, it's hard to follow through. And so the problem now is that if we were to give up now, we would actually be worse off than when we began. Giving up after you get up can be more detrimental than not giving up at all. Or giving up in the beginning, sorry. Giving up after you get up can be more detrimental than giving up before you get up. Here's what I mean. If you are in school, it's your second or third year, and you've decided, you know what, there's no hope, there's no point. Well, that's going to be more detrimental because now you have debt. And now you got to pay somebody interest, and probably a lot of interest. Now you've wasted all this time. It would have been better for you to make that decision to give up beforehand and to explore something else. Now, I'm not encouraging the fact that you shouldn't go to school, but after you've already committed and made decisions, quitting has more detrimental consequences. It's even true relationally, for example. It's one thing to say to your boyfriend or girlfriend, hey, this isn't really working. It's another thing to say to your wife or husband when you already have children, hey, this isn't really working. Giving up after you get up can be more detrimental than giving up before you get up. And so Paul is saying in this context, look, I've decided to follow Christ. I've decided to do his work, and I'm not about to give up now. I'm not about to stop what God has started in my life. And he goes on to say this, though our bodies are dying, and not just the physical body, but though our hearts and minds are being assaulted by life's pains and woes, our spirits are being renewed every day. Meaning you have reasons to give up, but there's a God who loves you and is empowering you to keep moving forward day by day. And here's the perspective piece in verse 17. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Now, they're not small in the sense that they don't matter. They're small because you have perspective. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them. It's a heavy glory. It's a heavy hope. The wind will not blow this away. It's too heavy and will last forever. So they're not small in the sense that they don't matter. They're small because of perspective. And so he says in verse 18, so we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. Now that's really hard right now because if you're in it, it's hard to see past it. And because of this pandemic, while we're all in the same pandemic, we're all experiencing it very differently. For some of you, you are now in brand new work challenges. You're in brand new friend challenges. You're in brand new relational challenges. But whatever the trouble is, the Apostle Paul is saying, don't fix your eyes on it because The things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. So there is both this promise of heaven, but it's also the promise of some measure of healing, some measure of provision and hope today to help you get to tomorrow, and then tomorrow to help you get to the next day and the next day and the next day until finally you reach heaven. And the idea is that if there really is something better ahead of you, don't focus on the disappointment behind you. Maintain a healthy perspective, because a healthy perspective in it will help you thrive through it. And whether you like it or not, whether you're sick of hearing it or not, I know I am, but there really is going to be a new normal to some degree. And honestly, don't you want your new normal to be healthier than your old normal? And if you do, a healthy perspective in it will help you thrive through it. But there are some challenges, and here's just one. Your perspective can be positive or negative, but rarely both. There's this age-old argument between pessimists and optimists, and it's usually worded in the form of a question. You've probably heard it. The question is, are you a glass as half full or half empty kind of person? And the problem that I've always had with pessimist or optimist is that there have only ever been two categories. And I don't think I was the only one that it bothered, because somewhere down the line it bothered someone enough to say, hey, let's invent another category. And that category was a realist. I'm not a pessimistic person or an optimistic person. I'm a realistic person, which, to be honest, when I heard realistic people, it just sounded like they were pessimistic people in disguise who are just tired of being labeled pessimistic. And so I just decided that I would create a brand new category. And this is my category. I'm a realistic optimist. I have hope for the future, but I know that there are obstacles that need to be overcome. And I guess because of the way that I'm wired up here, I enjoy setting goals. I really enjoy setting smart goals, specific, measurable, achievable, results-oriented, time-bound. Yes, I know I'm a nerd, but I love doing that kind of stuff. I love writing down my goals and that picture of a preferred future, and I enjoy thinking through the steps I need to take in order to get there. I know there's challenges, but with knowledge, planning, hard work, and perseverance, I know I can get there. Now, there are two incredibly important things about this point of view. One, it doesn't ignore problems, but it doesn't make allowance for one to become absorbed by problems either. Everyone has problems. I have problems, you have problems, but have you become absorbed by them? When you look at your bank statement, do you see what you don't think you have and the life you think you're doomed to live? Or do you see an opportunity to do things differently? If all you see are insurmountable mountains and problems, do you really have a healthy perspective? Because this perspective is what Paul is talking about when he says this in verse 18. So we don't look at the troubles. We don't look there. We can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. It's not that trouble doesn't exist, but we choose not to allow something negative to dominate our thought life. Victory very rarely means the absence of trouble. In fact, victory implies triumphing over an enemy. It implies that there is something either inside or on the outside that needs to be overcome. And you and I have to make a decision. Will you direct your gaze on the disappointment behind you, or direct it to the hope in front of you? And this might be a little challenging to hear, but when you focus on your troubles, don't expect triumph. Expect trouble. And odds are, maybe you have already experienced this. Have your troubles become the focus of your conversations? Or even your relationships. Maybe you sit down at the dinner table and your intention really is to have a real meal. Your intention is to have a real conversation. And yet for whatever reason, it goes back to that same argument, that same old fight, and nobody even really wins. You just argue back and forth, and there comes a point where you're just reciting old arguments and you're not even really sure what the other person is saying. And it's not that you don't try. You try, but every time it just goes back to that same problem, and for whatever reason, you can't get past it. And there's at least one reason that I know you can't get past it. It's hard to see past it if you don't believe there's something greater through it. Do you really have hope in your heart, mind, and soul? And if you don't, maybe before you need a miracle in your context, you need a miracle in your mindset, because a healthy perspective in it will help you thrive through it. But there is another challenge, and it's this: is my perspective of God and faith healthy? Now, I believe this, and to be honest, I think most people agree that a healthy perspective in life's challenges, a healthy perspective in discomfort, can really help you take appropriate steps to thrive through it. You really can be better for it. Most people I know would agree with that. Maybe you don't live it. I know I don't always live it because it's not easy, but most people believe it because it's a sound principle. But here's the conundrum. What is a healthy perspective? And in our specific context, what is a healthy perspective of God and faith? I mean, does this imply that it's possible to have an unhealthy perspective of God and faith? When I first became a Christian, I became a youth leader fairly quickly, alongside several others, but there was one who was my friend, and we volunteered in the exact same youth group. We volunteered really in the exact same areas in church. We even often heard the exact same messages. We heard and we liked the same kinds of songs. In fact, because we were so close, us group of friends, we even prayed identical prayers. We really had this near identical experience of faith, but with one crucial difference. After a couple of years, we came to two very different conclusions. I was convinced that God is real and that Jesus Christ is real and that he loves me, but he came to a different conclusion. He actually walked away from God and church and faith, and it was really kind of confusing to me, because how do two people who have had nearly an identical experience of faith come to two very different conclusions about their faith? And the problem that he really had was about God and his power, and he really wondered this question: if God can do anything, why doesn't God do more? And it's a legitimate question. I mean, even now, God is not sparing the world from COVID-19. But maybe setting aside the global challenges for a moment, it's a question you've probably contemplated in your own personal life. Where was God when this happened? Where was God during this tragedy or the loss of a loved one? Maybe you thought to yourself, well, I prayed, I believed, I read, I claimed that verse, I came to church, but where is God? Well, would it surprise you to learn that he's there right next to the trouble? When we read this passage, we read out of the New Living Translation. It's a very readable, contemporary English, but there are more descriptive versions that are a little bit more closer to the original Greek language, but we don't always read from them because it's a kind of English that we don't often read. And so this is what verse 17 says in the English Standard Version. For this light and momentary affliction, see, we don't talk like that, but for this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory, meaning it's a heavy hope. The wind's not going to blow it away. And this hope is beyond all comparison. There is hope, but it exists simultaneously with trouble. So in the middle of it, whatever it is, there is still hope to grow through it and to thrive through it. And honestly, I think the best example of this is Jesus Christ himself. Before he was crucified, he was in a garden late at night. The garden was called Gethsemane. And he prayed, Father, not my will be done. Meaning, take this cup from me, Lord, but not my will be done, yours be done. Meaning, if it's possible, take me around the cross. If it's possible, spare me from this. But if you take me through it, make me stronger for it. And really, he prayed this prayer as a model for us, but also as a sobering reminder about a faith principle that is somewhat difficult to hear. It takes maturity to be humble when God takes you around it, but it also takes maturity to be thankful when God chooses to take you through it. When you pray, take this cup from me, take this circumstance from me, but not my will, yours be done. It does take maturity to be thankful when he says, no, I'm not taking you around it. There have been times in my life where I believe God has supernaturally taken me around things like financial challenges, even physical danger. I was in a foreign country one time, and through a variety of circumstances, I found myself in an alley by myself, surrounded by unfriendly gentlemen. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what do I do now? And so I just turned around and I slowly walked away. And I don't know if it was the shock of everything that enabled me to do that. I don't know if there were angels there. But whatever the case may be, I do know that there have been times in my life where God has supernaturally taken me around things. But there have been other times where he's taken me through. He took me through some very challenging times in my youth. He took me through cancer. And the same for you. There have been times where God has supernaturally taken you around, but there have also been times where he has taken you through the storms of life. But this is God's promise to you. When he takes you through it, he'll make you stronger for it. And some of you are going through it right now, whatever it is for you. And you've been praying, God, take me around. God, take this cup from me. And sometimes he does, but sometimes he takes you through. And he doesn't take you through because he doesn't like or love you. He does love you, but he has an incredible plan for you. And he knows that you need to get stronger in the storm. But there is a critical mistake that I've seen people make in the storms of life, a critical mistake I've seen them make in their faith. A healthy perspective really will help you thrive through it. But if you make a healthy perspective just a decision, if it's just a decision, it will likely destroy your faith. Now, this person, my friend, whom I described earlier, who walked away from their faith, I had the opportunity actually years later to connect with them. And we just sat down for a couple hours and had a conversation over some cups of coffee. And I asked him, why'd you leave? Like, why do you kind of reject God and Christianity? Because for some people, leaving church is mostly a leisurely decision. They just got bored. They got better things to do. They just really enjoy golfing on a Sunday morning. It's just a leisurely decision to walk away. But for him, there was a real anger and a bitterness in his heart. And so I just said, well, explain that to me. And after he had spoken, it was kind of my turn to finally talk. And there was a turning point in the conversation. And I said something, and you'll read it on the screen. And then I explained something afterwards. Now, before I kind of go on, I want you to know that it took me probably about an hour and a half to say what I explained. And so I'm going to say it in a much more condensed version. We don't have hours. And because I'm going to say it in a condensed way, you might think to yourself, Pastor, that's kind of a mean way to talk. It is, but again, I said this over the course of an hour and a half, and so I'm just asking for some grace, okay? This is the way that I said it. So after explaining to me why he left, this was my initial response. I said to him, man, I don't even know what you're talking about. And he was really confused. And this next part, which isn't on the screen, for a good reason, I explained to him what I meant by that. And again, it took me an hour and a half to say. So it came out in love, it came out with kindness, it came out with grace. But I'm just going to kind of summarize that for you. I said to him, in summation, it sounds like you've invented your own religion from out of context pieces of the Bible, from legitimate questions that you needlessly left unanswered, from some mommy and daddy issues, from really too much video games and Wikipedia. In fact, it sounds like that this religion you've invented and rejected is something that I, as a Bible school student, would equally reject. In fact, if I wrote a paper outlining why I rejected what you've described, I'd probably get an A+. And we're sitting there in the coffee shop, and then ding, it's like the lights came on. And when I saw that, I asked him, so honestly tell me, like, why did you leave? Why did you turn your back on all this? And he kind of said it all again. And so then I asked him, well then, why'd you come? For years, decades almost, why'd you come? And he said, my parents made me. And I realized in that moment why faith stuck for me and it didn't for him. My perspective of Christianity and the Bible and Jesus Christ did not start as a decision. Now, it turned into one, but it didn't start as one. It started as a response to God's incredible love and mercy and grace. I was not coerced. I was not forced. I was not bribed to believe. I was, and I still am, intellectually and emotionally captivated by Christ and what I read about him in the Gospels and the Bible. I experienced the presence of Jesus Christ in my Christianity. And he didn't. And as I thought about that, and I thought about this passage that we read, and I wonder for how many people that's true today. When you read the Bible, when you talk about God and Christianity, it's just a decision that you've made on the outside, but there hasn't been an internal experience on the inside. And so when you hear a healthy perspective, you might think, sure, yeah, I'll decide to do that. But if it's just a decision, it can honestly be one of the most detrimental decisions you ever make. And so, as I thought about all this, I thought to myself, when we read the Bible, the truth is when I read something that not everyone agrees with. And maybe you know someone, maybe you're watching right now, and when we read this passage, sure, you read what we read, but in your heart of hearts, you heard something else. For example, we read, that is why we never give up. But in your heart of hearts, this is what you heard. That's why we give up. Because what's the point, right? Though our bodies are dying, nothing's being renewed. There's no real hope. For our present troubles will last, maybe even forever. And there is no hope. So we look at the troubles we can see now. And we don't talk about heaven because there is no heaven. We just fix our gaze on things. You're not really sure if you can have true peace, and so you just drink your sorrows away. You focus on a thing. You're not sure that your marriage can really be healthy, so you just buy things in the hopes that it might make a difference because there is no greater hope. There is no great beyond. You just focus on things because honestly, what else can you do? For the things we see now, even if we think they last, we know they will soon be gone. So what's the point? We read all this, but maybe this is what you heard in your heart. And you know what? You'd never say that in front of your husband. You'd never say that in front of your wife. You'd never say that in front of your mom or your dad. You would never say that in front of your parents. You would never say that in front of your kids. But that's what you've been believing for weeks, months, years, decades, maybe your whole life. See, I think a part of the reason why a lifestyle of faith is so difficult for some is because faith is just a decision. And it's okay if it turns into a decision. In fact, it needs to turn into a decision, but that's not necessarily the way it starts. I love what verse 16 says. It says, our spirits are being renewed every day. This is not just a decision. It's receiving God's incredible love, mercy, and grace. We don't force this to happen. We don't will it to happen. It is a gift that we receive. And it's not a one-time thing. Maybe many years ago you were confirmed. And honestly, I'm glad you were. Maybe many years ago you prayed a prayer and you used to come to church. And I honestly think those things are fantastic. But are you being renewed every day? Have you had a life-changing, a perspective renewing, and a mind-healing encounter with the presence of God today? Has this verse happened to you today? Are you experiencing the love of God today? Because it's a decision every day to receive something that you just can't simply decide to do on your own. And perhaps the challenge with a healthy perspective is that a decision to have a healthy perspective was never accompanied by a renewed heart, a renewed mind, and a renewed soul. Because in our faith, we honestly believe that when God renews you, He empowers you to push through. It's not just a decision to believe because your wife's making you, or your husband's making you, or your parents are making you, or your friends kind of expect you to believe. It's a gift to be experienced. It's a gift to be received. But here's the challenge. If you have gotten used to an unhealthy perspective, then renewal can actually be very uncomfortable. And I get that sounds strange, right? How is it possible for renewal to be uncomfortable? Well, if you're used to using a substance to cope with life, well, renewal means healthy habits, and healthy habits as opposed to unhealthy habits means change, and change is always uncomfortable. If you, for example, are used to responding in anger, every time something doesn't go your way, your response is anger, and in the moment it makes you feel good, and that's just the way you deal with problems. Well, renewal might mean dealing with it differently, but different means change, and change is always uncomfortable. But honestly, why not? I mean, for the sake of what your life could be, for the sake of what your friendships could look like, for the sake of what your home life could look and feel like, why not let God make you uncomfortable with what you've settled for? Now, even though renewal is a gift, you still have to push through. You still have to believe through and pray through. Remember that first verse we read, never give up. You still have to make the decision to get up. You still have to get up and keep pushing through and persevering through every single day. It's not something you just decide to do on your own. It's something that He empowers you to do every single day. Even as a church, for example, we need to push through life's challenges. Even right now, during our building project, we actually have to push through. I remember when I interviewed here, my wife and I, really excited because, we're building this brand new church, and I remember driving up to 1100 Canadian Place. What a fantastic address for our church. And now as your lead pastor, I was prepared to preach and teach and to pastorally care for people. Being involved in a building project has been a bit of a learning curve, but I have been enjoying it. And the truth is, while we're doing this incredible thing because of this pandemic, you don't get to see it as easily as you normally would have had we been meeting together. And so I want you to take my word for it. It's incredible. And it's not incredible just because it's a building. It's incredible because it represents the faithfulness of God in the past, but it also represents the great things that God has in store for our church. But as I've been saying for the past couple of weeks, we're in the 11th hour, and in this hour will be the temptation to give up, to stop praying, to stop believing, honestly, to even stop financially investing, to stop expecting that as good as it has been, better things are yet to come. Whatever the situation may be for you as a church or individually, we have to keep pushing through because we believe with our whole heart that God is not done doing what only He can do. He is still in the business of moving mountains. He is still in the business of making a way where there is absolutely no way. And I've experienced this, and I suspect you have too. But there are times where He actually moves the proverbial mountain in your life. There are times where He takes you around it. But there are also times where He takes you through it and just makes a way through the storm. And in our lives, even for our church, I don't know what God is going to do, but I'm convinced that the fact that He made a way back then, the fact that He moved mountains back then, He will still do the same today. He didn't just renew people many, many years ago. He still renews people today and empowers them to push through. Our perspective of life can be healthy because we know there's a God who gives us hope when we're in the middle of it. And so as we worship, as we pray together, as Pastor Kevin leads us, make this more than just a song. Make this an opportunity to worship in spirit and in truth. And maybe even for some of us, this might be the first time in a long time where we worship together, where you worship in spirit and in truth. But make this song more than words on a screen. Make it your prayer that the God who moved then is still moving today. What he did then, he will still do again today. A healthy perspective will help you thrive through it, not because it's wishful thinking. We can thrive through it because the God who renews us empowers us to push through in faith. So church, let's worship together. Amen.